Hi there, my name's Jake'a Spicera. I'm an artist, a drawing tutor and an author based in Brighton in the UK. I run a little drawing school called Draw, and I also write instructional drawing books helping people to use drawing as a way of engaging with the world around them and spending more time looking at other people and at the spaces that we inhabit. Derwent have invited me along to do a drawing tutorial today using their graphic pencils. It's the 40th anniversary of graphic, and so it's a nice opportunity to use these graphite pencils as a sketching tool for today's exercise. So I've got a set of the graphic pencils here. I'm going to be using 4 different grades. So I've got an H pencil, quite a hard one. I've got an HB, something a little bit softer, but somewhere in the middle of the tonal range. A 3B, something a little bit softer still, good sketching pencil. And a 6B, so a softer, darker pencil. So 4 different grades to use. And I'm going to be using this little combined eraser and pencil sharpener as well. Otherwise, I'm just going to be drawing on quite straightforward white cartridge paper. This is just a Derwent sketchbook. And I'm going to be drawing from a photograph of my friend Jade, talking you through skin tones, how to achieve different values using a wide range of different grades of pencil, and looking a little bit at the different kinds of mark making that you can achieve to describe the surface of skin. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to talk you through my processes, and if you wanted to draw along yourself, Derwent are going to make a line drawing version of the sketch I'm doing available, along with a finished version if you wanted to copy my marks, or if you wanted to do your own thing and to make your own creative response to this exercise, then that's fantastic as well. Okay, we're going to get started now.
So I'll begin with a little introduction to materials. We've got 4 different grades of pencil. The value of using different grades of pencil is that they all have a different tonal range. So the pencil I've picked up here is an H. That's quite a hard pencil. It means you're going to get really quite a grey mark. It doesn't allow you to get very dark darks, but it gives you a lot of control in the lighter tonal ranges. And it's always a really good habit to play around with the pencils you have to make a little kind of scribbled tonal range like this so that you can understand how dark you can push the tonal values and how light you can go as you're moving towards the white of the paper. So as you can see with this second pencil, I'm using an HB, and it allows me to go a little bit darker when I'm pressing harder. A 3B pencil is a pretty good soft all-round sketching pencil. It allows you a really good wide tonal range, so you can go really quite dark. It pushes a little bit darker than the HB was able to go. But as you move towards the mid-tone range, the slightly lighter grey marks, it has a little bit less subtlety. And that's definitely true of this pencil, the 6B, which allows you to go much darker, much richer, darker tones. But as you move towards the lighter part of the tonal scale, you get a lot less subtlety, a lot more grain in your mark making. And that's why we'd use perhaps 4 different pencils in one drawing, so that with the harder pencils, you've got a bit more subtlety in your tonal range. And then with the softer pencils, you're able to push much darker towards your darker darks. So try it out yourself, play around with the pencils that you have available to you, and you can try other grades. You could swap out a 6B for a 5B if you want something a little bit lighter. I'm also going to be using an eraser as a drawing tool. I think it's best to see an eraser as something positive, not as a means of getting rid of mistakes, but as a way of drawing light back into dark. So here I'm using it just to draw a light line through one of the tonal ranges, just to show you that it can be a positive drawing tool as well as a way of getting rid of errors. So next, the language of mark making we can use. So next, let's look at the range of different marks that we can make. Drawing's essentially a visual language. It's a way of describing something that you've seen or imagined in marks that help to convey something to a viewer. And having a clear visual language is really important, knowing what your marks are trying to represent and having confidence in those marks. When you're trying to create shapes of light and dark, I find it's helpful to have consistent, repeated marks to describe tonal values. Here I'm using hatching, quick parallel marks that allow you to build up a mass of tone. If you go back in an opposite direction, so that you build up multiple layers of hatching, you get cross-hatching. And you can make cross-hatched marks as curves built over curves or as straight lines built over straight lines. Anything where you hatch in one direction and then you cross-hatch in another. It allows you just to push tones a little bit further. So starting the drawing, I'm working over the top of a line drawing that I made the other day. I've got a photo of Jade up on a laptop screen in front of me, and I'm going to be laying in general tones first. So I'm using the H grade pencil to give me kind of light greys, and I'm hatching broad blocks of tone over most of the head. So anywhere that's dark, whether it's really quite dark or whether it's just a little bit of pale shadow, I'm covering with a fine layer of hatched marks just to get a kind of base of tone. I'm now going back in with a little bit more detail. So I'm going back over the top of some of the smaller tonal shapes, and I'm going to layer another mass of tone in the same H pencil back over the top at a slightly different angle, so that I'm subtly cross-hatching, building up slightly darker tones in the middle kind of tonal values. When we're talking about tone or we're talking about value, we're essentially talking about the same thing. So if you've read or heard about them being discussed differently, both the words tone and value describe the tonal value of something, how light or dark it is. And when you're trying to achieve different skin tones, I think it's important just to be objective, just to learn to look at what's in front of you, and rather than imagining what that tone should be, actually trying to just see how light or dark it is and replicate what you can see in clear marks on the page. So I'm blocking in masses of H cross-hatching over the top of my earlier hatching just to push some of the tonal values a little bit darker. I'm still not pressing all that hard with my pencil, so as not to make scratchy marks, and because I'm only working in an H, the tonal range is really quite limited. I can't accidentally go too dark at this stage. If I need to, I can always clean it up with an eraser later. So I'm bringing in an HB now. That's allowing me to push the tones a little bit darker. I've made sure these are nice and sharp before starting. And I'm going to go back over areas in shadow and darken them a little further. I'm leaving the darkest darks of the hair until later on, and I'm just working on skin tone shadows at first. So at the moment I'm building up the shapes of shadow in the ear, and then I'm going to work from facial features outwards, kind of looking at the key interesting shapes of shadow and starting to make further cross-hatched marks over the top of my earlier H marks to push the tones a little bit darker. As I'm making these marks, I'm still hatching. I'm still making marks in a kind of clear direction, but I'm using really quite short, sharp marks from my thumb and finger. It gives you a lot of control if you're holding the pencil a little bit further down, you're making thumb and finger marks, because it replicates writing, something we're really quite familiar with. We've got a lot of control over the fine motor movements that are required for that kind of finer hatching. I'm building up some of the shapes of tone in the features of the face, and that's allowing me to get a sense of identity, a little bit of focus into the drawing. Likeness very much resides in the shapes of features. It's less about facial proportion as well. Otherwise caricature wouldn't work. So the shapes of eyes, the shapes of eyebrows, particular character of the shapes of lips, and the tones that you build up around them are going to be really important to the likeness of a portrait. I've already done a lot of the hard work in this drawing. at the earlier stages of sketching out the contours, the outline edges of the face, I've kind of established a strong foundation on which to build all of this tone. That would be for another day, that kind of tutorial, but this is really just focusing on tonal values in the head in pencil. So as you're starting to look at different features, so as you're working through shapes of shadow in the lip, you might notice that the top lip is often in shadow, where the bottom lip often catches quite a strong highlight. It's the shadow underneath the bottom lip that really defines a lot of the lip shape. It's also really important not to miss out the neck and shoulders in a portrait. There's a lot of expression there, and it helps to set the chin in context to make sure you get a good strong shape of shadow supporting the underside of the jaw. So at this stage, I'm going to go in with a little more detail, kind of working in layers. So as you're noticing, I've kind of worked my way through the whole drawing several times. Now, there's no such thing as a kind of right and wrong or drawing. There are better and worse ways of creating certain effects, but there's no wrong way to go about a study like this. But I like to kind of scan through to give myself lots of time to make changes as I'm working, kind of allowing the drawing room to evolve. As I'm making marks in this layer, rather than just hatching in one direction, I'm going to be making marks that feel around the shape of the face. This is a more kind of sculptural approach to the drawing. It parallels with the idea of cross contour, if that's something you've come across before, marks that describe the curve of a surface. And in some ways it's a more sculptural process. So at this stage in the drawing, I've already established some of the lighter tones of the head, but I need to say something about the surface of skin, almost sort of how it feels, what it's like to actually have a skull underneath your skin, kind of what it's like to have a surface that you could touch. And when you're working from photographs, it's easy for your images to become really flat, to lose that sense of touch, of contact, and of kind of three-dimensional tactile quality. So making marks that feel around a shape, that have a sense of kind of sculptural quality, will be an important part of your kind of visual vocabulary. They'll help to kind of describe something that pure tone, that just light and dark, wouldn't quite be able to say. It's the advantage we have on a camera. A camera doesn't have a sense of touch and can't necessarily describe a curved surface. When we're looking at a face, we understand that that face has a curved surface in the same way as our own face does, and the marks that we make can help to describe that. So making sculptural marks that feel around a surface, as well as making tonal marks that all go in one direction, will help you to establish a broad and varied visual vocabulary. One thing you might notice on the right hand side of Jade's face is that I've got quite a kind of clean graphic line running down the side of her profile. Now, that was a bit of an imposition on my part. I didn't see such a sharp line as that in the photograph, but I've put it in order to differentiate the highlight on the side of her face from the white of the paper behind. And I think it's really helpful to think that actually a drawing that you make is your own drawing. You make creative decisions within it. You're not only trying to replicate a photo, even though that might be your main aim. You're trying to say something interesting about your subject, and that might mean making decisions that move slightly beyond just what you've seen. So I'm switching to a 3B pencil now. That's going to allow me to push the tones a little bit darker. So I'm going to be able to move in some of the dark of the hair. One of the great values of using several pencils all at once is that you can switch between different tones. If you're deliberately trying to keep your mark making a little bit lighter, a little bit paler, then you might want to use those lighter tones, those H's and HB's. If you're going for something darker, a little bit punchier, then you can immediately switch to a darker grade of pencil, a softer pencil like this 3B, or the 6B that I'm going to use later, and you can get darker tones immediately. So I'm using these darker tones for describing the tones of Jade's hair. I'm making marks in the direction of the hair. So although it already has a layer of kind of base hatching in H that I put down really quite early in the drawing, I'm going to make marks in the direction of Jade's hair to say something about the texture as well as the tone. That idea of kind of being able to describe the tactile surface of what you're drawing really comes through in hair. When you're looking at hair texture, you can imagine the direction that someone might have brushed their hair in order to get the kind of style or shape of the hair that they have. And as you're making your marks with your pencil, it often helps to follow that direction. So you're drawing the hair in the direction somebody might have brushed it or braided it. That helps to kind of emphasize the physical quality of the hair as something that isn't just a kind of flat shape of tone, but that actually has existence in the real world. When you're working from a photograph, it can be hard to kind of channel those things. But I think that's where it's helpful to be human beings ourselves. When we're looking at another person, when we're looking at drawing their eyebrows perhaps, we can feel our own eyebrows to understand that there's hair texture there. There's kind of something that we can feel. And that helps us to tap into a sense of empathy with our model and to make more than just a flat two-dimensional image. Now, some of the darkest darks in the face are around the pupils of the eyes. So I'm using the 3B here to put in some really dark tones in the centre of the eye, leaving a little bit of a light shape for the reflected light that tells us that the eyeball is a wet thing, that the person is actually alive. So those little shapes of really dark in the eye next to a shape of kind of bright highlight for the catch light that's just illuminating the eye help to give an eye kind of punch and focus. And when we're making our drawings, we can't help but kind of be drawn into faces and eyes. So as we're working through this kind of stage of a drawing, I think it's a really good habit to play around with pushing your tones a little bit darker, just seeing how that affects the impact of the face. So I'm also darkening centerline of the lips and the shapes of the nostrils. They're the kind of holes into the head, the kind of dark shapes that define the features, the purpose of the features. And so bringing a little bit more tonal contrast into those areas helps to draw attention into the key features of the face. So as I'm working through and adding further tones to the hair and to some of Jade's outfit, I'm making a few different stylistic choices. So I decided early on that I wasn't going to do all of the hair in detail. I've left some of Jade's plaits really quite light so that you can see some of the structure in them. I thought that looked like an interesting kind of set of textures. And with some of the hair in the back of her head, I'm allowing it to kind of remain quite a simple shape. The negative spaces, the spaces of light behind Jade's hair, I think are as important as the strands of hair themselves, the kind of braids. So I'm trying to kind of keep that relationship between light and dark shapes as simple as possible so as not to distract away from the features of Jade's face. Now, those kind of creative decisions are completely up to you. If your aim is to replicate the photograph exactly as you see it, then there's nothing wrong with that. You're going to have to work through in a much greater level of detail than I am. But I'm trying to allow this drawing to kind of be quite loose and quite simple in areas to contrast with the tighter, more defined parts of the face. Just a kind of personal, creative choice that you can make. Jade was also wearing a dark top for this photograph, but I've left it light. I've just left it as a simple shape so that I'm not just filling in loads of dark. I think it's important that you're not feeling restricted by the photographic imagery that you're working from. It's a starting point, it's a kind of jumping off point for your drawing. But the drawing itself is a unique and individual piece of work. And I think it should be personal to you. It should say something interesting about your subject that goes beyond what the photograph was able to say. And so the creative decisions that you make really kind of define what the drawing is to you. So at this point I'm going in with a 6B. I'm going in with something darker. So this is my darkest pencil. and I'm using that to add a little bit of extra dark tone to some of the features, and to push some of the tones of the hair a little bit darker. So with this 6B, I'm able to get the darkest darks that I can achieve in this particular drawing with this tonal range. I'm not going to use it for any subtle tones because it's a little bit too grainy to do that, and that was what the H and the HB were for. So I might come in later on and just make a few little changes to some of the skin tones in the drawing, but I'm going to keep this darkest dark, this softer pencil just for the hair. So at the moment I'm just hatching. I'm just making quick parallel marks to fill space. I'm also going to go back, and as my pencil's worn down on one side, making a kind of chisel-like point, I'm going to use some of that shape to allow me to get quick and efficient textures in the hair, particularly with kind of dreadlocks, with braided hair, with any kind of dark hair that has a lot of texture in it. Using the pencil to get broader strokes is going to help you to cover the kind of space of the hair quickly and pull out some of the interesting textures that you can see. I'm leaving some of the light shapes, some of the negative spaces between braids as clean as possible as well. If I kind of go over the lines, it doesn't really matter. I'm not making so tightly representational a drawing that a little bit of deviation from the edge of the outline is going to be detrimental to the drawing. But I'm just trying to kind of keep quick, energetic marks going. I'm trying not to kind of lose momentum in the drawing at this point. You never want to get bored with your drawing. I think if you feel like you're just making repetitive marks, you're not feeling all that engaged with it, it's good to kind of stop, take a break, come back to it later. It's really important to remain engaged while you're drawing. I think it should be something enjoyable. It should be something that feels like it's helping you to engage more with the world, not kind of engage less. And so I think feeling committed to the drawing is really quite important. So take breaks whenever you need. With a longer study like this, I think that's important. And this overall took me about 40 minutes to get to this point. I've sped it up obviously for this demonstration, just so you don't have to watch me scribble all the way through. But this is sort of a 40-minute drawing with maybe a kind of 30-minute drawing underneath it. So, you know, at least a kind of an hour and a quarter or so on this picture. And I've probably taken a couple of breaks during that time just to kind of stretch out, have something to eat, have a cup of tea. So I'm going back over the top with an HB. So using something really quite pale just to add in some of the skin tones. So just to kind of make a few little edited marks in the direction of the kind of sculptural surface of the face. I'm going to bring in an eraser shortly as well, just to kind of clean up some of the bits of the face. So anywhere where I need a lighter tone, where actually I've pushed a little bit too dark with the graphite, I can go back over the top with the eraser, take out some of those graphite marks and make some sort of positive highlight in the drawing. Derwent's going to make a line drawing version of this study available, so if you wanted to add your own tone to it using this tutorial or taking your own creative direction with it, then you can. They're also going to make a finished version of the drawing available so that you can see it in a little bit more detail than is possible in the video.